Hi, everyone. Welcome to the AwardsWatch Podcast. I am obviously not Ryan McQuade, as you might be able to tell right away. Ryan has a family issue that he needs to deal with, and we are wishing him the very best with that today. But we are still going to be underway with this week's podcast. And I have with me today the AwardsWatch Associate Editor, Sophia Ciminello,
Hi, everyone.
and AwardsWatch contributor Josh Parham.
Hello, hello.
We're gonna do just a little bit of Oscar talk at the top. It's the beginning of February. It's kind of a dead period. There's not really much going on until there is. We've got like DGA next week, and then things sort of start to happen. But I wanted to sort of see kind of where we were because we still have like SAG voting is going on, PGA voting, DGA voting. All those things are still happening because those periods are so much longer than Oscar voting is. But I want to see if you guys think there are any categories outside of what we think are pretty locked in ones that have some play, and that maybe this month of Q&As and special awards that are just being made up and created for this season might impact the race at all. Josh, what do you think maybe we could see?
Well, I feel like much like last year, this seems to be a time when Best Picture, Best Director, not really that interesting in terms of the mystery around them, but I feel like the acting categories are much more interesting, particularly actor and actress. I am so fascinated and worried, especially in Best Actress, as I am under pressure every year to get this category correct. Um, I'm so curious to see what that progression is going to be like, especially if it's under certain results that I'm expecting some splits and we're not going to have a consensus. And I'm curious to see who's going to win at some of these events, what the reaction to those wins are going to be. I think we all remember last year with SAG, the uproarious responses to all of those winners that kind of felt like sealed the deal for most of them. I feel like Jamie Lee Curtis really only won because of SAG in that speech. So I'm so curious to see about those categories in particular, lead actor and lead actress, to see what results we're going to get from them.
And what do you think, Sophia?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you, Josh, because yeah, it's like picture and director and even some of the other below the line categories just feel like, okay, it's Oppenheimer and that's how it's going to be. And for actor and actress, specifically actress, it's so strange. And Erik, I read your piece that you published on Friday about this, and you went into this race a little bit. And I have been having similar feelings, I think that you have, especially with SAG coming up, just wondering, like, is there a world where Annette Bening, wins there? Or we see something outside of the box happen in a category like that, especially since Lily Gladstone isn't competing at BAFTA. Could Hooler win there, right? There's so many different combinations of results that we could have. And I think another category that well, two categories really that I'm keeping an eye on as kind of up in the air are the screenplay categories, because I originally was like, okay, the holdovers for sure, like that will probably win original if Barbie isn't there to compete with it. And now it seems like I'm going to predict Anatomy of a Fall because of the strong showing there. And that movie has had such an interesting journey this award season, really starting at Cannes and not really losing any steam. And then with adapted screenplay, you throw Barbie in the mix, but Poor Things is also really strong and could have, I think, a strong showing at BAFTA. They could just go with Oppenheimer if that's the movie that they love. So I think, yeah, it's interesting to have some mix-ups in the above the line categories because usually those are chalk almost at this point, but the industry hasn't really weighed in a clear way yet.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly why this period it's the idle hands period. So we do start thinking about scenarios and looking at
Hmm.
things because we don't have anything else to do. So we're sort of, and yeah, I did that. I sort of got myself into this spiral of, what if Annette Bening wins? That would be weird, right? And then what does that mean? Because she's not at BAFTA, and then yes, Lily Gladstone is not at BAFTA, and Hooler is not at SAG. So where do these places meet? Because even in the era of very strange BAFTA voting structure that changes all the time, it's if you're not at least nominated there, it can be pretty difficult, with the exception of the one year where zero Best Actress crossover resulted in Jessica Chastain winning. And then, SAG told that story. So it makes it a difficult argument for Sandra Hüller to somehow pull ahead because she's not at SAG, even if she wins BAFTA. Almost the same way that Gladstone sort of feels like she's in a state of limbo too, unless maybe she wins SAG. So is that just all of us saying a lot of things that just mean that Emma Stone is going to win everything and that's just the end of it? Because it could be that too.
It could be that simple. But that's the exciting thing about this moment, is that we don't know. It could go in so many different directions, and it's fun to theorize. But yeah, it could just be Emma Stone sweeps, and that's that. And it'll make total sense if it does. I wouldn't be shocked if that
Mm-hmm.
outcome were to happen. But yeah, we want more suspense to the race than that.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Sophia. The screenplay categories are definitely giving us a whole lot to chew on, with Barbie's category movement and Anatomy just being such a really strong early player uh, in a category that is extremely competitive. And we've seen sometimes in the past that the screenplay category can either just go with the best picture winner as a part of its wins, or it can be a place where voters look for a almost like a second place or
The
a
consolation
slightly
prize.
Yeah.
consolation prize. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And even if looking at it from that perspective, there's too many things to offer, because Barbie would be that. Anatomy of a Fall would be that. In
I think American Fiction would be that. I think
Yeah,
people are
that
really
too.
sleeping on that movie.
Well, that
American Fiction
too.
is, yes. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it could win SAG Ensemble. Like there's still so many things that could happen with that movie to not necessarily change the tide to be strong enough to have that win everything, but to show its strength in key places. And I
Mm.
think if you look at the nominations that came through for it on the morning, like it kind of performed, it maxed out pretty much with what we were expecting, getting score, also, Sterling K. Brown getting in. I think it's a threat in adapted screenplay for sure.
Yep,
It
I
it it
100% do. And in fact, I
yeah.
think that at DGA, my prediction is that Cord Jefferson is going to win that over Celine's Song, and everybody's going to be so shocked by it. But to me, that's going to be the signal that
Mm,
this movie has got a lot of strength, and not that it's going to like overtake Oppenheimer in Best Picture, but I think that's going to secure it an adapted screenplay win. That's what I'm betting on coming up at DGA.
ooh,
That's a really bold prediction, and I like it. Especially since that category, even as new as it is, has given us a couple of surprises.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I do agree that American Fiction is that stealth contender in there, because it has won a very good smattering of uh critics wins. It does have the TIFF win, so it winning nothing would be a little odd, even though the Fablemans just did that last year.
Yeah, but two
But
years in a
yeah,
row.
yeah, it's funny because back in September, American Fiction was sort of that, oh, this could be the spoiler, and then the holdover sort of usurped that a little bit. But yeah, I think fiction makes a lot of sense, and it's even winning things like only adapted screenplay, like it did at Critics' Choice.
yeah.
Yep.
And that screenplay is also just like that's what they go for. right? Like when we think about screenplay winners, right? It's timely, it's political. It I think too, like with all of the different things in the air with how the category has really shaken out so far, yeah, it does make sense the more and more I think about it as a winner.
I,
Hmm.
yeah. See, there's plenty to talk about with the
Yeah.
Oscars. There's plenty. But we are going to move on to I guess, the main opening movie from this weekend. Although by box office and scoring, you would not think so, and that is Matthew Vaughn's Argylle, which was a very funny thing, at least on Twitter, watching people make posts like, I'm going to finally find out who Argylle is. Well, actually, it was spoiled 2 years ago in the
Yeah.
initial production notes and reveal about it. So, there you go. And among the three of us, and this might speak to its, success or lack of success, only Josh has seen it. So we thank you for your service, Josh. And in that, you will get to have the floor of what you think about Argylle.
Yes, a movie that just inspires so much passion within me. Yes, like uh yeah, this movie, the word I would actually use to describe it is exhausting. There are a handful of like kind of entertaining moments in it. I mean, you just throw Sam Rockwell in something and just by natural chance, something kind of amusing will happen just by his natural abilities. And so I did appreciate that. I appreciated some of the set pieces, but it's just so overstuffed. It is way too long. There's so many things that happen in it that kind of don't make any sense unless you know what the twist is. And once you get to the twist, it's like, okay, I understand now what they were trying to do, but I was frustrated by it. And I don't think that's good writing. I don't like it when a movie doesn't make sense unless I know the twist. That to me is actually bad storytelling. It's bad writing. Don't like it. And then once we get to that point, though, the movie stops becoming like somewhat of a spoof of a spy movie and then just becomes more of a traditional espionage like action thriller, but it throws so much junk at you, like the CGI backgrounds are just so lifeless and there's no real sense of weight to the danger that they're trying to present, and it's just such an underwhelming experience by the end that even though there's good people in it, Catherine O'Hara shows up. I wish she had had more to do because there's one particular moment when she is revealed more so in the twist that I really, really liked, but I wanted more of it. And that's why I feel like this movie is just lacking so much personality to for me to really get into it. And especially at that runtime, completely overstays its welcome.
I'm absolutely shocked that somebody would describe a Matthew Vaughn film as exhausting.
Yeah.
That's a turn of events that we could not have predicted. But yeah, I mean, yes, Matthew Vaughn is exhausting.
And he can be fun. I think so. Like I like the first Kingsman movie. I think the sequels are spotty. They have got some good things in them, but I think again overstay their welcome. But he can be really entertaining, but he needs like a solid foundation to build on, and this one does not have it at all.
Oh no. Glowing recommendation. I'm just so happy
Yes.
that I will no longer have to see the trailer every time I go to the theater or I'm just watching TV and can't fast forward through the commercials. No more Argyle trailer for me.
It
Yes.
is impressive that this is probably one of Apple's most promoted and marketed movies ever, and to fail this bad, it was like a 16 million opening, is pretty phenomenal.
And a C plus
That's
cinema score. So that's an example of
Yes,
it's not
that's
even
the other
like
part.
this is a bad movie, but people seem to really like it. No, the people who went to go see the movie didn't care for it either. And I think it is because it is just so relenting in stuffing its plot with all of these characters and all these twists that you just can't ever get a moment to actually sit down and appreciate the story and the characters. It moves so fast, but also throws a lot at you at the same time that it has like the mirage of entertainment, but it really isn't. It folds so quickly once you are going through that plot.
That sounds exactly like what it looked like.
Truly.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And what's funny is that we just got a trailer for that new Guy Ritchie movie that's coming out with Henry Cavill as well, and that looks a
Oh,
thousand times more entertaining than Argylle.
There's a weird place where I think Guy Ritchie and Matthew Vaughn sort of are like alt universe versions of each other, or like tethers of each other, with that absolutely like now sort of mind numbing style of editing, and like fast cinematography, slow down and then fast and slow down. And that's, they sort of both have mined that to a degree that just feels like it's almost cannibalized now.
Yeah, but I think the difference is that Guy Ritchie knows the parameters that he needs to work within. And I think to maybe put it simply, Guy Ritchie has accepted he'll never direct a Bond movie, and Matthew Vaughn hasn't.
Ouch.
that is a
Yeah.
perfect distinction.
Yeah, that's, yeah. I can't think of a better way to put it than that. Goodness. Well, unlike the runtime of Argylle, we are done with that conversation. And I think we will go instead now into spy movies that we like, and the reason that we like them. Because you mentioned, espionage, and sort of getting into these the modes of this kind of storytelling. And spy thrillers are among, I think, the most enduring genres of films that we have. They go back to the beginning of filmmaking. And even though most movies are already kind of give us vicarious existence, I think spy movies do that even more so, because the level of action and sneakiness and everything happening in these worlds of extreme wealth, uh, and gorgeous landscapes and cities give us this kind of like vacation locales, and we get to live through these stories in a way that dramas and comedies don't have quite the same. Not that, you know against dramas and comedies, but in terms of figuring out how and why we like something like this, I think wanting to be in the middle of a car chase, where we know we're not going to die, or sneaking into a hotel, whatever it might be, just jumping off of a bridge. We kind of we think about those things in a way that spy movies really kind of give us. Sophia, what's your take? Why do we like spy movies?
Yeah, I love spy movies for a number of reasons, but I think it really starts with if you look at, like, if I look at my favorite spy movies just decade by decade, I can see, okay, this is exactly what was going on politically and the way that the filmmaker tried to comment on that existing paranoia or the climate that existed. A paranoia thriller, a spy thriller, that is just like my favorite place to be in at the movies oftentimes. So, thinking about like World War II, the Cold War, Nixon and Watergate, these things that happened in the world were, I think, best illustrated through spy movies. And that's how the public would often engage with those topics too in brand new ways. And I think I just love how oftentimes the scripts of spy movies feel very intricate and web-like with their plots. We have these very intelligent characters that are also often very stylish, like yes, Bond being one of them, but also, I mean, we have a number of other characters across the examples that I'll give for my favorites, but nothing feels safe or off limits in these movies. I think that you feel just as uneasy or unsafe sometimes as your protagonist. And Erik, you also touched on the locales. I love how these movies take us to so many international destinations with really wealthy people in just beautiful homes, really stylish costumes. And it's just, I think at the end of the day, they can be really intelligent on these topics that I'm talking about, really commenting on, what's happening politically, but they're also just fun. They're oftentimes just fun cinematic experiences. So I think that's why I love them so much.
Yeah, I mean, I get like obsessed with the tradecraft of spy movies very,
Hmm.
very much. That becomes where I am most excited. Josh, what are your thoughts on spy movies? Why do we like them?
Yeah, I think there's another element of like kind of the puzzle box mystery of it. Everybody loves a puzzle to figure out, and obviously, spies have to deal with secrets and who's allegiant with who, and where we have to find some element of the plot that moves in this other direction, and it can get convoluted at times. But I think it's a convoluted piece of storytelling that people like to engage with because it feels like they're in on the mystery as well. We like solving the mystery along with the character. And I think that that is at the heart of a lot of spy movies. I think the whole travelogue destination kind of examples I think are really important to that too. It's one of the foundations of the Bond films, honestly, is that a lot of people went to go see those movies because they shot in locations that, especially in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people didn't have opportunities to see. And I've always admired that too, but I have also just really loved, yeah, just figuring out the mystery as well. I think that's always the fun part of it. And if you can also mix in some like genuine entertainment and genuine comedy in there as well, I think you can even have a better recipe right there because then it's so fun, but you're laughing at the same time.
Yeah, and I think when we start talking about our favorites of the genre, I mean, I think hopefully they will cover that that scope a little bit, because I mean, I certainly have at least one true comedy on my list, and I imagine other people would have too. But do you remember like your introduction to this genre? I mean, did it happen watching a VHS at home with family or by yourself? And what was that like
It's so
for each of
funny
you?
because as I was thinking about this, I was going back and just thinking, what was my first spy movie? Like, was it Bond? And it's so funny because my mom loves Bond, like all of the Bond movies. And so, like, I grew up knowing that these movies were important, that there were good Bond movies and bad Bond movies, but also that the fun comedic quality that's a part of some of them is also what makes them great. And my first Bond movie was Goldfinger, which I will talk about later on, spoilers. But when I think about the first spy movies that I actually watched, I grew up like in the 90s and like early 2000s. That was a great time for spy movies for kids. So like Harriet the Spy in particular, I had that VHS. It was this like orange, the
Yep, the
box was
Nickelodeon
orange because it
one.
was a Nickelodeon movie.
Yep.
Hmm. Yep. So that was probably my first one, with Michelle Trachtenberg. I just like I loved, loved, loved Harriet the Spy. Get a Clue with Lindsay Lohan. Watched that. That was another, I think that was maybe like 2002. And Spy Kids, of course, which I think is 2001. So that kind of that 90s, early 2000s period, as I was growing up, I was just having a lot of fun with these movies that, I don't revisit these now when I look for my spy movies. The ones I like now are a little bit more adult, but these definitely left an indelible mark on me, I will say.
Spy
Josh,
Kids
what?
is amazing. Yeah.
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 Always got to shout out Spy Kids. But yeah, for me, big shock. It was James Bond, and
Hmm.
it was also Goldfinger was the first one that I saw, and I have very distinct memories actually of that VHS because I remember in those days the like MGM VHSs all had the same label. It was like this silver label they had on them
Oh,
with red
yeah.
lettering. Remember, all the
Hmm.
MGM VHSs were like that, and I remember being 6 years old and even asking my parents like, can we watch that movie where like the guy comes out the water and he's like putting something on barrels and there's an explosion? Like I didn't remember all of the movie, but I remember the pre-title sequence so vividly. And I, from
Hmm.
6 years old, I was like, I love this material. And from that point on, I just devoured that series. But yeah, then so many other spy movies too. I agree with all of those. And again, I think it's just as a kid, you really love not only the mystery, but like the flamboyance of those stories too, because they're usually really big and theatrical, and that's always going to be appealing to a kid. And yeah, but Goldfinger was the first point that that obsession began for me.
Well, and growing up with Goldfinger too, I just always remember thinking it was just so cool how this woman was just painted gold. I was like,
Yeah.
what is going on? That, when you're like young experiencing that, you those kinds of images just stick with you because it's transporting you to another world. And like when I think back on my earliest memories of that movie in particular, it was her and what she looked like, but it was also that bowler hat. Like there are certain
Yep.
things that I think just stick with you as a kid that also work when you're an adult. Like I still love Goldfinger, but those things I think are what make that movie in particular so fun and so memorable.
Yeah, I was obviously grew up in a different generation, but very similar thing. And it weirdly wasn't a Bond movie. That was my introduction. It was a parody of Bond movies called Condor Man from 1981 with Michael Crawford from Phantom of the Opera.
Oh,
And
wow.
it
Whoa.
was it was the very first VHS that we ever got, that my grandparents got, because they had enough money for a VHS player. So they got that and they wanted to know what we wanted to watch. And it is in all ways exactly as huge as any Bond movie, if not more. Explosions, locations, car chases, sports cars that come out of old trucks to uh, reveal themselves, and just an insane, ridiculous amount of tradecraft. And like you were saying earlier about the Cold War, Sophia, this is 1981. So this is about a Soviet spy that wants to defect to the West. And there was nothing more 80s than movies about US versus Soviet Union. And it, but obviously at that time, at 10 years old, that wasn't what was on my mind. But in retrospect, it's kind of fun to think about how a lot of these stories were, yes, telling us what was happening in the world, or commenting on what was happening, but using the format of great action and really a lot of excitement to tell it. uh, I still love that movie. It's dumb and it's funny. Oliver Reed is a really great villain. I mean, it just has,
Mm.
like, the villains are just Bond villains. Like one guy has like this like silver eye, and it's stupid, but it was totally the introduction to all of that for me. Weird.
I need to watch this. But also
It's
your point about villains, I think I also I've always loved a good villain. Like from when I know we talked about this in another episode that we did, but like from when I was like a little kid, like I always was so much more interested in what Maleficent was doing than what Sleeping Beauty was doing. And I think that's part of the reason why I've always loved the spy genre too, is because the villain is always so over the top. They have these extreme motivations and they're just always so fun to watch if they're in a comedy or one that's more of a straightforward thriller.
Yeah, always preferred the villains.
100%.
Always did. Yeah, I had a
Yes.
book of Disney villains when I was a kid because I couldn't
Love it.
less about the actual heroes, but I wanted all the villains. They were always my favorite parts of any movie.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was the same. Yeah, Maleficent, or the horrible woman from The Rescuers.
Yeah.
Oh my
Oh my
God, she
God.
was
Madame
so mean.
Medusa.
Madame Medusa, so, oh my God, but she was amazing. That makeup, I mean, and the hair. I'm like, I want
Yeah.
to be her, even though she's
Hmm.
Yeah.
ratchet and scary. So yeah, Cruella, of course. These are
There you go.
heroes.
Yeah.
So they're
They're also gay,
misunderstood.
so that makes
I mean, you're not wrong that
yeah.
yes, that it
I mean,
was.
looking back on it, it's like, no, that makes a lot of sense now that I was into these characters.
Oh my God. All right, I want to talk about then the spy movies that we really like, and why. Because I think immediately, yes, we can go right to Bond films and Mission Impossible films. And I know those are going to be on, our list in our conversation. They're really the cornerstones, I think, for what we understand uh, classic or traditional spy movies to be like. Um, and so we'll definitely get into that. But there's all kinds of versions of a spy movie, and certainly ones that came before and since then. Um, one one of my favorites, and this was one that was actually one of my husband's favorite movies too. Very early in us, you know, watching things together and just figuring out where our styles and our likes matched. And that was 3 Days of the Condor.
Oh, yes. This is on my list
Uh,
too.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's really hard, uh, to put together Sidney Pollack and Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway and not have something that isn't absolutely exciting and thrilling, and Max von Sydow. And it just, yeah, it doesn't have the action of a Mission Impossible and a James Bond. It is a more espionage intellectual thriller, and that I really love. Uh, yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah, I love that one too. It's also on my list, like I said. I think what I like about it, I really love this period in film history where we're having these like political conspiracy theories and thrillers coming off of the Watergate scandal. And what I love how this movie opens too, like when Redford goes to that office and all of his coworkers are just murdered. Like everyone in there, like they've all been shot. And then I love when a spy movie will just like kick off from there and suddenly you have like your protagonist or your main character just on the run trying to figure out what to do from there and figure out what's going on, who put this plan in motion. And Faye Dunaway and Robert Redford are also just so hot in this movie. They look so
Mm-hmm.
amazing together. And it's so, it's kind of silly when they first get together and like, I don't know, she's so scared of him. But in her autobiography, there's a great section where she talks about this and she says how hard it was for her to pretend to be scared of Robert Redford because he looked that way. She was like, I'm supposed to be afraid of him? I can't be afraid of him. He's Robert Redford, which is just incredible. But I love the part in the movie too when she actually gets on board and she like goes along with him and she's kind of finally on his wavelength and not like get out of here, get out of my apartment, trying to like, telling him that her boyfriend is waiting for her and she actually links up with him. I feel like that's also a really fun thing that can happen in spy movies is when a person who's been kidnapped or who wasn't involved previously is suddenly swept up in the action and needs to get involved too.
Yeah, that's what's one of the neat things about this, and sort of gives us there's really kind of two ways to really do a spy movie. You're either already a spy and you have, all of the knowledge, and we're the audience kind of following you through this case, or you are a paper pusher who is just sort of thrust into the mystery, like Redford is in this, because he's really just kind of a bureaucrat, really. And
Mhm.
that gives us the difference between kind of the vicarious, Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise thing versus regular person. What would I do in this situation? And I think that's, again, one of the things that's so fun and exciting about spy movies is that we have sort of one of those two forks to go down, and they're both great.
Especially in the 70s, it seemed like that was a really big thing, especially with such distrust in the government too. It was really manifesting in movies at that time. And I always think about how like distrust in this government was so severe that this isn't a spy movie, but I always remember how something like Capricorn 1 imagines Nassau getting involved in like an assassination plot. Like that's the
Hmm.
basis of that movie. Like people were so distrustful of the government, like even Nassau was, a cover for assassins. Like I just find that to be so funny. But that really is at the heart of those kinds of movies. And I love those 70s political thrillers. And yeah, fully expected Sophia to mention that movie also. That is totally a Sophia movie.
A
It
full
it very
Sophia
much is.
movie.
It
Yeah.
very much is. Josh, what's something that's a highlight for you?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like sort of putting aside Bond for just a second. I do really like those spy movies that do get into more of the serious, grounded stuff. And even when it's like somewhat far-fetched ideas, the presentation of it can be very stark and disturbing, and I do really like that. And I think about something like The Manchurian Candidate, which is one of my favorite movies. And, the plot to that film is a little bit silly and ridiculous, involving mind control and all that. But the presentation of it is just so riveting. The characters themselves take that material very, very seriously. And I am just so invested in discovering where this is going to go, what the eventual plan is going to be. And I think the performances in that movie, they're all just amazing. And I kind of feel like Angela Lansbury probably should have won the Oscar. I know that's taking it away from Patty Duke, but I think that she is the best of that category. And Lawrence Harvey is really great. Sinatra's good. And John Frankenheimer, like one of the most underrated kind of old school directors, I feel like. People don't talk about his filmography that much, but that man really understood how to tell a distinct story in a movie and do it efficiently in a way that you were still engaged by the story.
Love that. Yeah, yeah. I see the brainwashing thing is such a funny thing because I think politically right now and in the last decade, we can while the concept of literal brainwashing is feels far-fetched, I do think that we we feel like we're in a place now where the susceptibility to believing things has it it's viral. So watching something and thinking about something like the Manchurian Candidate, brainwashing doesn't really seem that far fetched.
You could definitely take that concept and apply it in a modern setting, and you can tweak the circumstances, but underneath the surface, it'll still be the same. And that's what makes that movie so great too, is that even though it takes place in the past and is dealing with, I mean, Manchurian Candidate, it's referencing a country that we don't even refer to it that anymore, but it's getting at very real political structures that are still in place today. And that's what makes it still have so much power, even though it's set so many decades ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love
Sophia.
that one too. Yeah, I have so a couple of mine I actually put in pairs just because I thought they either worked thematically that way or they were made by the same director and had similar stars. So two that I paired together, Notorious and North by Northwest. So this kind of Hitchcock double. They're looking at different time periods and different political situations, but they're both pretty provocative in how they're thinking about them. So Notorious, this is really I don't know. It's provocative coming off of World War II. This is 1946, and it's looking at Nazi characters in a different way that I think was kind of strange for Hitchcock at the time, even. But this is Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman, and it really, I think, manipulates the audience in smart ways. And it's an early instance of Hitchcock doing it in a way that we'll see, I think, throughout his career. So it really is also a love story and a story of deception. And I think those are also key hallmarks of spy movies that I love. I love when there's also a woman who gets kind of swept up in whatever the man is doing at the center of the story. And it's really, I think, the start of his sort of exploration of those themes that he's going to continue later on, especially in Vertigo. And it also features one of my favorite tricks that he does across his filmography, where we have this high crane shot with a zoom in to a close up of the key in Ingrid Bergman's character's hand. And it just shows, I think, one, that Hitchcock is the master of suspense, of course, but also what you can do with the camera when your audience is already on edge and you have a particular object that they're fixated on. And then also starring Cary Grant, we have North by Northwest, which is one of my favorite Hitchcock movies. I saw this at a rep screening maybe 2 summers ago, and at the end of the screening, an old man stood up and said, "Now that's a movie." And that's exactly how I feel about it. I think it's also really bold because it asks you to entertain the idea that there might be more than one man in the world who looks like Cary Grant, which is a really great premise for a movie. But I just think Cary Grant is so great in this. Like I mentioned, a different time period. This is looking at that Cold War era spy thriller, and anything with James Mason as the villain, you're already, I think, like on solid ground if you have Cary Grant and James Mason. But here, Eva Marie Saint and Cary Grant also have good chemistry. I love how stylish this movie is and how fun it is. And of course, we have these incredible set pieces like the crop duster scene and the Mount Rushmore scene as well. I just like when I think of that movie, I think of those scenes and how they still make me feel when I watch that movie, but also like how I felt the first time I saw Cary Grant running away from that plane and how no other filmmaker can really do that, even though some have tried. And one tried last year with Leave the World Behind, and it really didn't work.
It really did not. I love that. Obviously, Hitchcock is a bit of a blueprint for so many
Mhm.
that followed, uh, and North by Northwest and Notorious, and there's just so many that I know we're already have talked about and going to talk about. I kind of started looking. I mean, I have just a list without anything like added to it, just like here's a lot of movies that I like. And then I started looking at thrillers and spy movies that took the basic tenets of a great Hitchcock thriller and just did extraordinary with them. And then I found myself again back in the 80s and in Cold War, with Roger Donaldson's No Way Out with Kevin Costner, which first, the hottest I think Kevin Costner's ever been, maybe even more than Bull Durham, like absolutely stunning in this,
Mhm.
just gorgeous. But it does a similar thing to Condor in that it sort of takes not really an everyday man, but kind of an everyday man, uh, and puts him up against forces much more powerful than him, and you know, wrongly accused of a crime, and everything looks like it's against him, and it is. And when you have Gene Hackman as your villain, it's pretty easy to lose. But I love that it hits the right balance for me of thriller, of realistic ish, without being over the top. It's not car chase heavy, but it is also extremely sexy. I mean, the the scene with Costner and Sean Young in the back of that car is just one of those moments in movie history that sort of feel like it was on the precipice of the 90s sex thriller era, but it was much more concerned about all of the other stuff, the thriller stuff. The sex was just a really just an added jolt because they could. Um, but yeah, I don't know why. I might have too many like picks from the 80s. I'm really kind of stuck in that era in a weird way. I mean,
Well,
I have definitely more, but I
the
just
80s is a
love it.
really interesting time period, I think, for like spy stuff, especially when you compare it to or juxtapose it against the Cold War, because the Cold War is still going on, but you feel it ending. Like you feel that you're about to enter an era that's going to dramatically change, but there's still these old hangups from decades before. So it's this weird transitional period that you're not quite there yet. There's still these hangups, but something is on the horizon. And I think that's why so many 80s like political spy thrillers are so interesting, because it really taps into that transition that's happening in the world at that point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Josh, what else do you have?
Well, at this point, I will recognize James Bond. I have to, at some point. Um, and we did mention Goldfinger, but I actually would say the movie that I would mention is not my favorite of the series, but it's the one that I think embodies like the spy world the best, and that's From Russia with Love, which is like in the heart of the Cold War. Like this is, to me, is the one that is the most about the Cold War in terms of the Bond films. And because of that, I feel like some people complain actually about that movie having it too complicated of a plot, where there's all these things you have to follow and people are behaving one way and they're really somebody else, and it is difficult to track, but I think it should be like it's a spy story. There are these different mechanisms within the plot that are happening that you need to follow, and I think the movie does a really good job of establishing that and making you care about that too. And even though it's a movie that doesn't even really have a singular villain that is the most recognizable to people, I think it works within that spy framework, that there are multiple villains. There is a hierarchy that people are involved with. And just because you eliminate one section doesn't mean that the other one has gone away. And I like being on the edge of your seat with that. And plus it has some great set pieces too. There's a particular fight on the Orient Express that I think is sort of a signature of that entire series. Just so like brutal, especially for 1963. It's kind of amazing that they went so realistic a fight in that movie, and it's really really well done. So of the Bond canon, I would definitely say that to me embodies the spirit of spy movies really well. Um, Going on the opposite end of the spectrum, I would say one that I really want to mention is True Lies, because
Oh
I
Oh,
my
love
God,
this movie.
yes.
I
I
love
love
True
this movie
Lies.
too.
It's so unbelievably fun, and I maybe Cameron's most underrated film, because people don't talk about it as much as they should. And I mean, Cameron deserved an Oscar later for making Tom Arnold tolerable in a movie. Like that's a Herculean task that he was able to accomplish for his audience. And I think Jamie Lee Curtis, this should have been her Oscar, personally. I think she is
Hmm.
incredible in this movie, where she has to have this giant character arc, but you believe every second of it. She's so funny, and she can even nail some of the dramatic bits as well. Arnold is really funny too. And there are some amazing set pieces as well. I will still think about that car on that long bridge and the helicopter scene. Like it's amazing. And I think it is, as I said, maybe the most underrated movie of Cameron's filmography, because it can be perceived as like light, and it doesn't have the technological advances of some of his other movies. It isn't dealing with serious subject matter, but just as an entertaining movie, God, it is so, so fun.
It's
you
so fun. Oh,
the two movies you mentioned, Josh, are really interesting in comparison to your talk about Argylle so much, which with bad CGI and like zero stakes looking is something that from Rush with Love and True Lies don't suffer from. The set pieces are real and practical and feel absolutely like they're happening, and there's nothing that will bring an audience in more than when they're not thinking, wow, that is a CGI background on that train. It's like, no, that person is on that train right now. And that's it. You can't replace the feeling that has when we're allowed to let down all of our uh guards and be completely into what we're watching.
Yeah, exactly. It's that physicality that I think those movies in particular sell really well. When you get that scene when the car is going off the bridge in True Lies, and she's hanging by, grasping onto Arnold's hand. It's like that's a real stunt they did. And in fact, you even get a close-up shot later on. It's not that stunt, but they had Jamie Lee Curtis like actually up there dangling from some helicopter. And yeah, that goes a long way to sell the danger of that moment. And like, oh my God, there's a scene in Argylle where I don't want to get into the setup of it, but essentially there is like oil spill in a room, and Bryce Dallas Howard uses blades on her feet to skate through it. It's so stupid.
Oh
But
no.
it looks
Oh,
so incredibly fake. Like even the oil that they had in the beginning of the scene just spilling out, you can tell that that is fake. Like, why do we need fake liquid when it's not even doing anything, but not interacting with anybody in the scene? Like from right off the bat, it just looks so artificial. And I think when you rely on that too much, especially in a spy movie, then it loses your tether to reality, because I think spy movies still need that. They still need to feel like they operate in the real world, because that real world element is what makes them so much more interesting.
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's exactly
um,
it.
yeah, yeah. Sophia, continue. What else did you like?
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say too, like I watched True Lies again, like I think for the first time in full last year when Jamie Lee Curtis was nominated, because my dad was like, "You need to watch True Lies. You really need to watch it. Like, don't be so mean to Jamie Lee Curtis," basically is what he was saying. Um, but I watched it because it had always kind of been on TNT, I think, growing up. So I had seen like bits and pieces here and there, but I loved it. And I think it is that grounded quality to it when also paired with these more absurd set pieces that we encounter. And I just felt like I feel like Cameron, he always, direct his action sequences that he directs are always very emotional. Like I get very emotionally invested in them. And I felt that way with this one. And I just thought, like, is this my favorite James Cameron movie? It's definitely up there after watching it. But to take a hard pivot, Erik, I'm glad you mentioned the 80s because I have nothing from post 1974 now on my
Mm,
list of what to talk
mhm.
about. But my next pair of movies, I don't think you could call either of these fun exactly, but I think of them always together. And I think because I used to get the titles confused, or I think they were kind of interchangeable. But the first is The Conformist, the Bernardo Bertolucci movie from 1970. This is also a very Sophia movie,
Yeah,
Josh, I'm
I
sure
was
you.
gonna say, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the other would be Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation, which
I was
is
expecting that too.
50 this year. Yep. So I think these like kind of isolated, reclusive, lonely characters who have a job in front of them. And then throughout the movie that follows, they keep either messing up, not knowing what's ahead of them, and that being like I think a real barrier where they suddenly become even more paranoid than they were before earlier in the film. And the way I think that both of these films actually think about sound, memories, and the shot composition are very similar. And I think actually The Conformist really influenced another Coppola film, The Godfather, and The Godfather Part Two, of course. But I think just starting with The Conformist, what I really like about this film is that you have this Jean-Louis Trintignant character named Clerici, and he's this man who, as the film progresses and unfolds, he's asked to do a number of things, but the way that the film progresses, it you start to see his memories kind of layer in with the actual action of the film. And it's difficult, I think, to feel grounded in anything that's happening within the timeline. And at the backdrop of this really is fascism and everything that's going on politically in Italy at the time. And the other thing I thought about when I was watching this, and this might come up in a bit if we talk about Bond, but when I watched this movie earlier, I thought, I don't know if this could ever be tackled in the same way today. It's just so difficult, and you don't really get it until it clicks for you at the very end. But I think Andrew Scott could really nail a part like this. Like someone needs to make The Conformist, like a version of The Conformist today, but for him, because I think he needs that kind of like dark, cerebral, political film to really pull apart. I think he could nail it. Um,
Wow.
I just like I started thinking about it again today and how much I love that performance in it and how, in thinking of that character's memories and his encounters with women and how he's been tasked to assassinate someone and how all of that comes together. Like it's a very internal performance at the same time. I think the movie requires that of him. And I feel like that's such an Andrew Scott thing that I could see. But and then another great performance in The Conversation. This is my favorite Hackman performance, one of my favorites, just period. I think it's incredible. And in a similar way to The Conformist and a number of other spy movies, one of the things that I love is when the central character is haunted by their past. Like there's something from their past that either keeps them from progressing or is why they're attached to a particular case or hunting down information or solving a crime or a riddle that's in front of them. And that's what Hackman's character faces here. And the sound design being so important. And I think the ending of this movie is just brilliant. Just seeing the ruins and the wasteland again, like The Conformist, but just seeing that character's face in that moment and realizing that he will never know the answers. It's just brutal. I love these films with these kind of low, harsh endings. So I would highly recommend both of those. They're tough watches. I would say The Conformist more so than The Conversation, but
Yeah, yeah.
definitely worth it.
Oh yeah, no, I mean the Conformist was one of those foundational movies in my very early video store days of like
Oh,
where can I, look outside of anything, American films, anything. And for 1970, it just felt so absolutely aggressive and uh just sort of underlined how far ahead Europe was to
hmm.
the United States, even the England part of Europe was into to what they were willing to explore. And Conversation, also my favorite Hackman period. Period. I I love how much surveillance is almost such an easy uh, uh, subject for a spy movie. Blow up, the lives of others. Really, just it, it's so easy to instill suspense and paranoia. And yeah, I think The Conversation is a plus.
Bertolucci's
Yeah,
best movie, in my opinion.
yeah, and I also
Yeah.
think Conformist is Bertolucci's best film too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I am gonna go really left uh from what we've just been talking about and what I was hopefully alluding to earlier. And I want to talk about Spy with Melissa McCarthy.
Yep.
Oh
It's
my
on my
gosh.
list. Yeah.
I do love it.
I, an absolute perfect example of paper pusher, but still in the world of all of this spy and tradecraft, uh, thrust into the middle of it with I love Bridesmaids, but this is my favorite Melissa McCarthy performance. This is it. Um, I mean, she's basically kind of been doing a lot of this exact performance since then, but I don't really care because this is sort of like the original. Um, it also gets to have a big enough budget to it so that the locales and the tradecraft and the car chases and all of that get to look and feel as real as they do almost in a Mission Impossible movie. It doesn't feel like a knockoff because it's a comedy. It's still a gorgeously shot film. It's Robert Yeoman, I think, did it.
I think so,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and
It's
it was
always
funny.
fun looking at cinematographers' IMDb pages because it is just the the variety there, really.
I I
Everybody's got
I
to have a check for something, you know?
I
Hmm.
did I did a Q&A with Robert Yeoman a few weeks ago for Asteroid City, and I had to open it by talking about Spy and about that when you attach a technical crew, cinematographers especially, that are extremely talented and known in other genres, and you let the comedy also look expensive and look like it has scope, you turn it into something else, because a comedy, whether it's an action comedy or not, can often feel really flat. You've got that really boring 185 ratio, and it doesn't there's it's not very inspiring. And this is the opposite of that. It feels just luxurious, and it is one of the funniest fucking movies ever. And half of that is definitely from Melissa McCarthy just riffing through her insults. But it, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else to say other than that I absolutely love it. I love her progressively worse costumes that are supposed to make her, blend in as a stupid American, but she just looks even worse and more outrageous than if she was just walking around like her normal self. That just, yeah, I think it's super.
It's actually like smart humor for a dumb comedy too. Like you can imagine like the version of that movie directed by her husband and how just unbelievably bad that would be.
This is
But
what I'm talking about.
yeah, but no, this one is it's so smart and how it delivers its comedic premises. And I even like that, they make fun of her character, but they don't go for like the easy targets that you would expect. And then she's allowed to develop into a character that you would actually believe in this situation. And while still being so funny. Like I will the line "you look like a slutty dolphin trainer" will never leave my mind. I that will always stay with me.
I love that. I love when she is in the office with Allison Janney, and then Allison Janney's looking at the footage of her in her doing her, you know, shooting and everything. It's like, what the it's absolutely exactly what I kept like saying in the whole movie all the time. I love it.
Yeah, I love Spy. And that was also on my list of things to mention. I think that I agree. I think it's her best performance. It's uh Paul Feig's best movie too, in my opinion. Like I think that movie, as I said, it is so smart in how it deploys what you are expecting from those characters. And it does not go for the lowest common denominator, it doesn't go for the low-hanging fruit. Like, because even in that scene with Allison Janney, when she's looking at the footage, like you would expect in a normal movie that she would be really inept, and that's what they're remarking on, like, oh my god, I got to send this person out there that doesn't know what they're doing. But no, it's that she is proficient in it and that she is tapping into unused potential. And I don't know too many movies that would actually go that route. And kudos to this one for doing it, because it makes the characters more interesting and it makes the situation more funny.
And I need more directors to understand the comic genius of Jason Statham, because this might is probably my favorite thing that he's ever done as
Yeah.
well. And Jude Law, absolutely hilarious. It's I love any director that knows that an actor has more in them than what we've sort of been allowed to see, and lets them breathe a little bit. And both of them are absolutely fucking hilarious.
I love that
I
you
love
both
them.
picked a comedy. I have like no comedies on mine, which feels crazy, but I just went like full darkness on my list, just realizing. And now I want to rewatch Spy again because you're reminding me of how funny it is. And I agree, like Jason Statham, this is like his comedic gold here. It's Yeah, I wish more directors knew that, but also Melissa McCarthy. It's like some of the projects that she's been in lately, I just miss things like this for her and people who actually understand where she can go comedically. I mean, I will say she was great in Can You Ever Forgive Me also, which is a little bit more
Yes.
dramatic, but yeah, I'm all for watching Spy and recommending that.
Yeah.
Yes. And we need to
Uh,
make it a federal crime for her never to work with her husband.
Oh,
yeah, no, I absolutely feel like that needs to be a law.
Yeah. I can't understand how people who live together and have a stable relationship can't figure out how to make a good comedy together. It's
I,
I
bizarre.
I
uh,
I wish them nothing but the best
Yep.
for each other. I just don't want them to ever work together
Yep.
again.
They seem like
Ever,
a very
ever.
lovely couple. I'm rooting for them, but please do not work together because you make
Please,
horrible abominations.
yes, please
yeah.
no. Sophia, let's hear some more.
Oh, more on my list. So I
Yeah.
think I went through quite a few since I did my little pairings that I have, but I mean my favorite Bond movie is Goldfinger. I think that this is just the one where when I think about everything that the Bond franchise has done best, it really is this one. And this one, I love how in Goldfinger, this is where I think for me, when I think about the comedy of Bond and kind of not taking things so seriously, this is where that really shines brightest. But also where I think some of the things that are formulas in later Bond movies really start, like the way that the song is used in the beginning. And Josh, you mentioned that pre-credits sequence. Like that, I think when I think back to Goldfinger, that's a moment that's always a moment I really, really remember. And also like again, the villains are great in this movie. I love the set pieces, and I just think it is really the perfect combination of everything that you can have in a Bond film. And just mentioning Odd Job as a character and this hat that he uses. It is just like it's so funny and so perfect tonally with where Bond can go. And just the names of the characters, the costumes, again, taking us to these different locations. It's difficult to explain, I think, why I love it so much because it's just been a part of my life for so long, but I think it really is the superior Bond. And I am lucky enough I get to go to London for work a few times a year for my day job, and they are so good about playing rep screenings of Bond movies over there. And I've seen this one a few times now in theaters, and it's better every single time. I've also seen some odd ones as well, like Octopussy, which I can mention later on. But yeah, Goldfinger really stands above the rest.
Yeah, I mean, to pardon the pun, it really is kind of the gold standard for Bond movies.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. Like it's also my favorite of the series too. And a part of that is because it's the first one I saw, so I have the nostalgic attachment to it. But also it is the one that if you ask somebody to describe a typical Bond movie, like this is the one that has all of those elements, but it also has them to the best possible degree and the best execution of it. And like it's a classic for a reason. And for all the things that you stated, like yeah, I was obsessed with Oddjob too. I had a big fedora obsession when I was younger, so like I would wear them a lot as a
Aw.
kid and would throw them imitating Oddjob. And
Oh my
you
Mhm.
got
God.
that car too, the DB5, which obviously I mean they're still using it. That is the Bond car.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it's very much embodies everything that people normally associate with Bond. And even though as the series goes on, they have some variations from that formula, this is where they nailed it down. You know, it was a third movie in, they were still experimenting a little bit, but by this point they figured out this is what we do best with this series. And yeah, it is exceptional here. And Connery is also great. I mean, and the Bond girl's name's Pussy Galore. Like how
Yeah.
you can't get any better than that, you know?
You really can't. I like whenever I rewatch it, I always like it's not that I forget that her name is Pussy Galore, but it's still just funny every time you hear it again for the
Yeah.
first time in the movie. And yeah, and this is I think such a fun performance from Connery too. And he was also just kind of done with it by this point too. But this really, I think, brought him, back into how he could, I think, feel in the role as Bond.
I love Goldfinger, and I also really love the other Gold Bond. That's a weird, unfortunate combination of words. But I love Goldeneye.
Yeah.
It was, and I want to close with some Bond talk in a bit, but I don't want to miss out on just talking about a few other titles. But one of the great and fun things about Goldeneye was, like Goldfinger, like a lot of Bond films, and that is a really good sense of humor. Villains that are kind of fun or funny, um, or even like sub villains, like Alan Cumming, not really a villain, but he's sort of like he's just a patsy nerd, and he's really great. Bonka Johnson, that is a great Bond villain.
Xenia on a top. Come on.
I mean,
Amazing.
it almost makes the Austin Powers names completely
Yeah.
useless, because
Mm-hmm.
they're not nearly as audacious and funny as the real ones. They're ridiculous. They're crazy. But yeah, Pierce Brosnan was such a, at the time, I mean, every single new Bond is always a controversial choice. It doesn't matter who or what. Um, Brosnan was at that time sort of an easy pick because he had done a spy TV series, Remington Steele, that was
Hmm.
super popular. So it just sort of seemed like like a natural progression, and it really was, because he had all the posh uh,
Well, he was actually
heart.
going to be Bond before
Yes,
GoldenEye, and there was a whole thing where his
yes.
contract came up and they snatched him out of it, and Dalton came in. So yeah, so he was already kind of primed to be that character to begin with. So yeah, a natural progression to cast him.
Absolutely. And I adore that movie. And of course, the stakes are nothing less than world domination, because why would they be anything less for a James Bond film? Um, but yeah, I realize we've talked like around Mission Impossible a bit, and I think it would be crazy not to speak a little more directly to them, because talk about movies that put you in very real scenarios, because we know Tom Cruise's not even penchant for doing his own stunts. It's a requirement. And all of these moments, whether it's jumping out of a plane or fighting on a train, are very real, and they take us there in a way that is simply unmatched. I think my two favorite of that series, because there are a lot at this point, um, are the first. I think the first from '96 is still the best of them. It doesn't have, quite the level of action that Fallout does. That would be my other favorite, I think. But this point for Cruise, that this sort of like 10-15 year period of his film career, just unmatched. Also maybe the best he's ever looked ever too. Just absolute smoke show.
I'd
But
agree. Yeah.
I mean, perfect haircut. I'm just like, yeah. And whew. Anyway, I I enjoy every single bit of the tradecraft of Mission Impossible. I think maybe more than any spy franchise or style of movie, because it is such a central point, definitely for James Bond too. But I like what Mission Impossible does more so, because again, it's 96 for this, so it does feel less outrageous and a little more realistic. I mean, yeah, a piece of gum that you fold in half and can, turn into an explosive like a little piece of C4. Why not? Absolutely. I'm there. It makes perfect sense. Just don't chew it. Um I love that it has a sort of not pre-credits, but like an early famous death with Emilio Estevez. Really horrible way
Yeah.
to die. That was,
Scarred me as a child, yes.
yeah, because they really show it. It's a very brief flash, but those spikes go right into his face, and
Yeah.
that's the end of
Yeah.
that for him.
Mm.
But I love that. I love that they all sort of have these sort of pre-credits sequences, like a cold open. It's fun. Nothing kind of gets you in that mood, and then obviously the music, you're there. I love the early days of the internet in Mission Impossible, of trying to
Hmm.
figure out the job versus Job. I mean, it's stupid, but it's kind of funny. It's
Yeah.
great. Vanessa Redgrave, excellent villain. Um, yeah, I love it. I love it. It's my favorite of the series, and I imagine you guys enjoy at least some of these movies too.
Yeah, definitely. I do really like the first one quite a bit, and I think that really holds up. Fallout is my favorite just because I remember when I saw it, I feel like that also came at a point in the series when I frankly just kind of thought like, okay, like do I really care that much about these movies? Like they just kind of exist for me to go and have a good time and just have fun. And this one was, it just felt different. Like the stakes felt very high. I felt like the characters that they introduced and the characters that came back I just felt like they were very cared for, both in the script and just in how they would interact with each other. But it also had just all of those great set pieces that you want from a Mission Impossible film, but also they took the action to another level. I think that these films can be very convoluted and sometimes hard to follow, but it doesn't really bother me, I think, because they're so good at just taking us from Paris to London to all of these different places around the world, but also in, like I said, making the stakes feel very real and very high, and also having those moments of fun also throughout the film where you are supposed to take these seriously, I think, but they're also just they're so exciting as just like fun popcorn movies. Like I remember when Henry Cavill in that scene when they're in the bathroom, it's getting ready to punch him and it's almost like he revs up like he's a toy or something like an action figure and you can see him like preparing his punches. And I feel like yeah, having, Rebecca Ferguson in these films and here, I think she's just fantastic. And I don't know, I feel like Fallout for me was like what really, I think, revitalized my interest in the series as a whole.
Yeah,
Henry
Fallout
Cavill
is really good.
literally cocks himself
Yeah,
in
it
that
is. It's like he's
bathroom,
just like, it's
and that
so funny.
changed the world.
Hmm.
Yeah, I really like Fallout. I think for me, the turning point actually for Mission Impossible was Ghost Protocol, because I feel like that's the one where they really, I mean, they were always focused on like Tom Cruise doing his stunts, but I feel like that tower sequence where he's just literally hanging off. I think that was the one where it really decided that no, this is going to be our thing. And
Hmm.
Yeah.
and I like that sequence just will forever stay with me. I just think that there are so many great moments like that in that film. And I do like the series overall. I agree about the convoluted plots that God, like every single one of them, I can never remember what any of them are about.
I know.
That's always been my one big complaint is that the stories are so convoluted and kind of generic that they quickly leave my mind. And I get that, like that's how they're literally made. They put the set pieces, they come up with those first and then they craft the story around them. So like I get it. That's not what we go to a Mission Possible to see. But I do wish the stories were a little bit stronger, but at the same time, I do have so much fun with them that it's not a big concern at all because they put so much work into that spectacle and you love them for it.
Yeah. I agree. That's such a funny point too, just in thinking about the scripts, because I can go back and really like remember the plot points of Bond movies in a way that I cannot for
Yeah.
Mission Impossible movies. Like even Bond movies that I
Yeah.
don't like, I can tell you generally what happened, and Mission Impossible, it all runs together for
Yeah, it's
me.
like I remember there's like a virus in the second one. There's someone mentioned Iraq in the third one, but I cannot tell you like what the actual villain's plot is. Like even Fallout, which is really great. It's like there's a bomb that goes off at the end. I know that, but what they're trying to do, I cannot remember.
See, that's why the original is it's really simple. It's like here's the real names of agents, and it's out in the open for the highest bidder, and that's it. And that's
Yeah.
that those stakes are extremely high in that world, and it's high enough that that we can go there with it.
Yeah, I can
Uh,
remember that one only because when I watched it recently, I was like, "Oh, that's the plot of Skyfall." So I have to reference a Bond movie to remember what the plot of the first Mission
yeah.
Impossible was, even though I know it came later. But that's my touchstone of remembering one plot from a Mission Impossible movies, and it reminds me of a Bond film.
Yes. So speaking of Bond films again, I do want to close actually with, maybe some speculation of what we would want to see in the next era of Bond, because Daniel Craig is, well, ostensibly done. And
I think he
his
made that
Bond
pretty clear. He's finished.
very much, and his Bond has been killed and literally retired. So, if we are working with a completely clean slate, and regardless of what Barbara Broccoli wants, I want to know what you guys want to see in a new Bond and who you'd want to see directed. I know Christopher Nolan is such a common choice, and I get it. And if it's somebody that you mentioned, sure, it makes a lot of sense. I'd love to see if we could kind of go a little bit maybe outside of that, but first, who would you want to see as Bond, Josh?
Well, that's always the big question to ask any Bond fan of who would you want. For the longest time, my number one pick was Dev Patel, and still kind of is, but it seems like now that he's gone off to make the Monkey Man, he probably is of the opinion that he's just gonna do it himself. But I really like that idea of Dev Patel because I think that he's somebody who totally embodies like the classic vision that you would have of Bond, but he brings something very modern to it as well. And I mean, very obviously, it is a person of color, and I think also a South Asian person being cast in that role is really fascinating because it just brings so much more meta commentary to like because that part of the world especially has a very complicated relationship with England to put it lightly. And I think that would be such an interesting juxtaposition to bring into the story while also still having a guy who looks great in the role and could match that physicality and could also bring the acting prowess to make the dramatic moments really work too, with all the things that we love to Daniel Craig for. And it also feels so much like modern for today's age. So that has always been my dream casting, is that I would love to see Dev Patel in that role.
I mean, I love the idea of Dev Patel, and it's funny because we're talking about all of these movies that take us to beautiful locations and exotic areas. And one of the things that's always kind of funny is that it is, if it's in South Asia or East, one of the things that stands out is that here is uh, a white guy in a sea of non-white people. So to be able
Mhm.
to provide kind of the opposite, or to have somebody
Yep.
like Dev Patel, and then set some action in India or South Asia, where he becomes less a standout and more integrated in a way that is beneficial for Bond as a character. I think that's fascinating. I love
Yeah,
that idea.
I love that idea too. Now I'm like, oh, I need Dev Patel to be Bond. Mine are truly all over the place. only one of them is British. So I know that the Brits, like, they need a British James Bond.
Or
My
somewhere in that
two,
vicinity, like, Scottish,
yeah.
Irish, like they'll even stretch it to Australian if they have to. But
Well,
maybe they're not because they had such a
speaking
bad experience with the one Australian. Maybe they'll never
Know
do
where
that
this is
again.
going.
speaking of
But
Aussies,
yeah.
Jacob Elordi obviously is one of my picks. He's young, he can be attached to Bond for many films, so they can really, I think, you know, he can do like, I don't know, 6 or 7 of them if he really wants to. He's really, he's in his 20s. He looks amazing, obviously. Like, just imagining him in like any sort of Bond-esque attire. They can bring back those, like, the bathing suits that Bond wore in the old, the Connery ones, like, bring those back. I need
Oh.
Jacob Elordi as a Bond for selfish reasons purely. Um, my American candidate, who I think could be really good, especially after, I don't know, I feel like he put in a great performance this year, and I think he could like do an action thriller film. Charles Melton, I want to see what he
Hmm.
continues to do, and I feel like he has the right look for Bond going forward. But my British candidate is actually Riz Ahmed. Um, I feel like in a similar way to Dev Patel, I wonder, I feel like I've seen him in so many like cerebral kinds of dramas, like when I think of The Night of, that miniseries, which he's just fantastic in, even just Sound of Metal, like he can do the quieter dramas, but I also think he could stretch to kind of get into this like kind of bigger, more action-oriented role, like Bond. And again, he's a Brit, so and when we're thinking about like British relationships with other countries and groups of people, like being Pakistani, that having like that ethnicity for Bond is really interesting, and how British people, what they did to Pakistan as well. So I don't know. I think that would be interesting to move it forward. For a while, I also wondered if a woman would be Bond and if they would go that route and gender flip it, but I don't know. A long time ago, I thought maybe Emily Blunt could do it, but I don't know. I kind of feel like they will go with a man for the next Bond still.
I mean, yeah, and I not that in I'm a purist or traditionalist in any way. I would rather see a female spy character in her own
Hmm.
story and franchise rather than take over for a Bond. I almost feel like, but also too, I mean, it is a fandom like any fandom that is intensely toxic,
Yeah.
and I don't
I'm
I
aware,
don't
yes.
I don't know any actress that would really be able to withstand the amount of horrible commentary that would follow uh, that happening. Um, we know that Idris Elba has been very vocal about not ever wanting to be Bond because he just the mere mention of him possibly resulted in like literal threats on his life and his family's life. It was it's so horrific and also inescapable, um, and which is a really horrible trapping. Then I think of of how we would get to see this character. Um, but in sort of thinking of people that I would like to see in it, and I'm kind of with you, Sophia, in an age range where if you want to start a new era, you kind of you want to get them at an age where they would have experience as a spy, but they're not, 50 years old and when they're starting. Um,
You
and
don't
I
want to
know
run into
that
a Roger Moore situation.
exactly.
Yeah.
I know Aaron Taylor Johnson has like already been like very named. I think he would actually be very, very good. Um,
I would not complain
I
about that
I
either.
I
I mean,
I
I
would
wouldn't
not.
either.
I wouldn't be upset one single bit if that was
I mean, I
that
would
was
just
the
be
case.
constantly thinking, are you carrying two revolvers in
I'm
your
just like, is this
that
going
a
to be
second
an
silencer that you got
R-rated
in your pocket?
Bond? Thank you. Exactly right. Um, I I could also see, and I would probably want to stay in the British realm, or at least, the voice.
In the kingdom, as
And
it were. Yeah.
exactly. And I think there is also a physicality to James Bond as a character that, you know, Roger Moore didn't have. He was pretty small, older, frail, a little too on the posh side and not enough on like the action side.
Yeah, he was the lover,
Um
not the fighter. That's how I
yeah,
describe his Bond.
yes. So somebody that I would love to see would be Darren McCormick, um, who I think is a really diverse actor because he's funny, he's extremely charming and sexy, and oh, actually, that's it. Just those. No,
That's
I
enough. Yeah.
I think
That's
that might
good.
be
Yeah.
enough. I think that might be enough. Um, I mean, you could probably pick and choose a lot of people from like Peaky Blinders,
Yeah.
to that have walked those halls to graduate to James Bond. It wouldn't be a difficult road. Um,
Yeah.
I also I would kind of be like into this is gonna feel weird. Will Poulter, I think, would be really interesting as Bond, mostly because I would want to see him running around in, you know, speedos like Jacob Elordi. But also I think a really great dramatic actor, and I think he could be very physical in this role too. And I think he's young enough to carry it out for uh, three or four or five or six. Yeah.
Well, Will
And you
Poulter
asked
is
about
not really one
directors
that,
too.
yeah,
Okay.
Will Poulter is not really one that I had popped in my head, but I mean, I understand. I'm not, it's not like I don't completely get the selection. I understand.
I also I would be really into Henry Golding.
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
think he
I did think
has
of him too.
the stature, the voice, the class element, um, and he can give a physical performance too. So yeah, I think he would also be pretty fun.
Yeah, I would love Henry Golding in that role as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably pretty good for today. We're not casting any Bond, anytime soon, so this is just a little bit of fan casting here. Um, but yeah, if anybody listening has their ideas of who they'd like to see or spy thrillers that they really enjoyed, please definitely leave us some comments and let us know what you think. Josh, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at JR Parham, and you can also find a lot of my work over at Next Best Picture and Awards Watch.
And Sophia.
And you can find me on Twitter at Sophia_Sim, Letterboxd, same handle, just without the underscore. You can find my podcast, Oscar Wilde, where we release episodes every Friday. We're currently doing a contender series on every single nominee at the Oscars, going category by category. And it's been very fun. And you can find all of my reviews and interviews from this season at Awards Watch. And now I'm just thinking about how I want, not necessarily for Bond, but this Andrew Scott movie, maybe directed by Jonathan Glazer. Just can't stop thinking
Well, I
about it
mean,
now.
he's got his Ripley limited series coming out in
Hmm.
April, and I think that's
There we
going to
go.
do a whole lot to sort of to give you a little bit of that. And
There we go.
yeah, I think that's yeah, I think about that daily.
Yeah, can't
Um,
wait for that.
You can find me at Twitter at awards_watch and AwardsWatch everywhere else, Instagram, Letterboxd, and awardswatch.com. And yeah, like we said at the top of the show, it's kind of a quiet time Oscar wise right now, but next week is DGA, and once that starts, it's really that's it. We're all in at that point, and every weekend and packed during the week will be a guild announcement and ceremony until we get to the end of February, which will have SAG, Spirit Awards, and PGA all on top of each other in one weekend. Super fun and crazy. And then we'll be in the middle of Oscar voting at that point. Sophia's and Nick's Oscar Wilde podcast, because it is so good.
Thanks.
The series right now
Yeah.
is wonderful. And I know we talked a little bit offline about what Nick's reaction to one specific animated short might be.
Oh no.
And so I cannot wait to hear that.
It's
And
coming.
honestly, I can't wait to talk about the shorts categories, because I think they are pretty interesting.
Yep.
And I do think
Yeah.
the eventual winner of animated short is going to be one of the worst of all time. And I can't wait for that to happen. So until then, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.